Chapter 18, Important Lead. To Nancy's relief, she recognized the newcomer as a guest at the yacht club. Quickly, she said to him, "Please get the police. We're holding a thief here." Terror came into the eyes of Ned's prisoner. He tried once more to get away, but Ned held him in a tight grip. Nancy asked him, "Who gave you the key to this place?" "Mr. Basswood. I do trucking for him." Quickly, Nancy shot another question at the man. "And for Marco DeKeer, too?" The prisoner stared at Nancy in disbelief. Then he said, "Sure." As if suddenly proud of his identity, the man puffed out his chest. "Trunk Rassin is strong. I can lift anything." The young detective wanted to quiz the prisoner about having forced his way into the Drew home, but he evidently had no idea who she was, and Nancy decided it would be better if he did not know. She would leave the assault charge against him to her father. "I'm still Debbie Lynbrook," she thought, and went on with her questioning. "You say you can lift anything? Even a very heavy statue?" "Sure, why not?" Nancy pursued a hunch she had. "Did you deliver a life-size marble to someone in Pittman or Pittville?" "I sure did, and she was a beauty, too." The man's bragging came to a sudden end. A look of fright came over his face. Apparently he realized he had talked too much. He merely shook his head when more questions were put to him. In a few minutes, the customer returned with 2 police officers. Trunk Rassin was taken into custody. His bravado gone, the prisoner did not attempt to escape and would say nothing. Nancy took one of the officers aside and whispered to him, "The River Heights police are looking for this man. I suggest that you contact Chief McGinnis there." "We'll do that," the officer replied. Nancy went on, "Mrs. Horace Merriam in Waterford will be able to identify him." After Rassin and his truck were taken away, Nancy and Ned discussed this latest happening. She remarked, "I believe Rassin was supposed to remove all the worthwhile merchandise." Ned frowned. "Nancy, I don't like the looks of this whole thing. Boy, am I glad I came when I did. When I think that you might have been a prisoner of that." Nancy patted her friend's arm. "You may even have saved my life." She looked at him gratefully. There was no chance for further conversation because customers began to arrive. Many did not intend to purchase anything. They were merely curious as to why the police had been there. To each question, Nancy would reply with a smile, "We caught a thief." The reactions were varied. Most of the women said, "Weren't you terrified?" The men would become angry and wish they had had a chance to overpower the burglar. There were so many people in the shop that Ned was forced to act as salesman. He told Nancy he was enjoying himself immensely. Shortly before closing time, a man who had purchased a rather large painting handed Nancy a $100 bill. Mr. Basswood had left a small amount of change in a drawer in the rear room. In order to save time going back and forth, Ned had been putting the cash in one of his own pockets. He was busy at the moment, so Nancy started for the highboy to see if there was enough change in the cash box. But force of habit led her unthinkingly to Mr. Basswood's office. Then, realizing he was not there, she started away. "Maybe the door's unlocked," she thought, "and I can find change inside." The knob turned and the door swung inward. To her astonishment, the drawers in the desk and the file cabinet stood open. All were empty. "Basswood has skipped out," she said to herself and hurried to find Ned. She whispered her suspicions to him, then said, "Here's a $100 bill. The painting is $75. Ned pulled a wad of bills from his pocket and counted out $25 in change to the customer, then said he would wrap the painting. "That won't be necessary," the man said. "I have a blanket in the car I can put over it." He went off. There was no chance for Nancy to discuss with Ned what she had discovered in Mr. Basswood's office. At 4 o'clock, all the customers left. Nancy locked the front door, and the couple rushed to the office. "You're probably right that Basswood has skipped," Ned remarked. "And I guess he really did send Rassin here to pick up the stuff. You sure fouled that little scheme of theirs." Nancy smiled. "What an afternoon! We have captured a suspect and taken in several $100s from sales." "We'd better not leave this money here," said Ned, "and I don't want to be responsible for it." Nancy suggested that they take it to police headquarters. "And I think I'll leave the key to the shop, too." "Good idea," Ned agreed. "Furthermore, I don't think you should come back here again without police protection." The young sleuth nodded. She locked the door and the couple set off for police headquarters. Captain Turner was there. He took them into his private office and asked for the full story about Trunk Rassin. After hearing it, he asked Nancy to make a formal complaint against the man so they could hold him. If it was true that Mr. Basswood had sent him to pick up certain objects, he had a legal right to do so. "I'll confine my complaint to having been attacked," Nancy said. When the formalities were over, she and Ned drove to the yacht club. The desk clerk said Mr. Ayer wanted to see Miss Lynbrook the minute she came in. Ned waited in the lobby while Nancy went to the manager's office. "Hello," he said. "I have a message for you from George, and it sounds important." His eyes twinkled. "Don't keep me in suspense," Nancy said, smiling. The message was, "We trailed Basswood to the Maple Motel in Pittville. He is registered there with Marco DeKeer. Bess and Dick and I will wait for Nancy in the Robin Roost restaurant until 9 o'clock. It's located across the street." "That really is news," Nancy told the manager. "Ned and I will go there at once. He showed up unexpectedly at the art shop and stayed to help me. By the way, we caught one of the men involved in the mystery." "You did!" Mr. Ayer exclaimed. "Who is he?" Nancy told him and asked if Mr. Ayer had ever heard of the trucker. "No," he replied. "I guess his place of business isn't in Waterford." Nancy said, "You're probably right," and added, "If George calls again, please tell her we're on our way." She and Ned set off at once. It was an hour's drive to Pittville. They found the restaurant easily. Bess, George, and Dick had had an early dinner, and they talked while Ned and Nancy ate. "Mr. Basswood did not seem to suspect that he was being followed," Bess reported. "He went directly to Marco's barn and picked him up. Then they came here and are still in the motel." Ned asked Dick how he liked being a detective. "It's great," he replied. With a grin, he added, "The first thing I found out was that Debbie Lynbrook is really Nancy Drew." Bess blushed. "I'm sorry, Nancy, but I gave your secret away." Nancy laughed. "The whole story may come out sooner than we thought." She and Ned briefed the others on their encounter with Trunk Rassin and what they had learned from him. "You actually caught the intruder at the art shop?" Bess asked unbelievingly. "We sure did," Ned told her. "I hope those iron muscles of his won't be able to break the bars of his jail cell." Nancy and Ned ate leisurely. Basswood and Marco DeKeer did not appear. On a hunch, Nancy left the others to talk to the restaurant owner, Gus Becker. She asked him if he knew of anyone in town who might own a life-size marble statue of a woman. "Yes, I do," he replied. "Mrs. Jonathan King. She has an estate on Tulip Road." Nancy was thrilled by this bit of information and also at what followed. "Mrs. King is loaded with money," Gus went on. "She has a house full of paintings and statues, most of them from Italy." "I believe I'll call on her," Nancy said. "Thank you very much." When she returned to the table, her friends could see excitement in her eyes. Ned asked, "You've picked up another clue?" "A terrific one," Nancy replied, and told them what Gus Becker had said. "It's only 8 o'clock. Maybe we can see Mrs. King tonight. How about you going with me, Ned, while the rest of you watch for Mr. Basswood?" They all agreed to the plan, and Nancy went off to telephone Mrs. King. End of chapter 18.